Every time I make a new camera gear purchase, I tell myself that it's the last time for the rest of the year. And then, like clockwork, 2 months after that, I find myself on eBay just absolutely jonesing for some more crap that I don't need. For example, I really need new shoes. Look at these. Look. The sole is like coming off of it entirely. I still wear these like almost every day. This is what my wallet looked like for several months. Several months. My ID could not even stay in here. It kept falling out, and I kept just putting it back in and be like, it's fine. It just goes back in there real easy. What do I need a new wallet for? And only last week did I finally spend $15 to just go ahead and get a new identical wallet. So I hate spending money unless it's a new shiny piece of metal that can take photos slightly differently from any of the other shiny pieces of metal that I already have. So long story short, I bought a Mamiya 645. And this camera is incredible in a few different ways, but I have a huge problem with it, and it's kind of overshadowing all the things that I love about it. What's up? My name is Walter, and I'm a photographer and commercial filmmaker based in the southeastern United States. And on this channel, I'm all about trying to put the fun back into professional photography. So if that's something that revs your engine, subscribe for more crap from me. So I'd been eyeballing medium format photography for a long time. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you might remember a video I did a couple of months ago where I talked about my experience with the Fujifilm GFX50S2 in a wedding scenario. You should definitely check out that video after this one. I'm proud of it. I think it did well. I really loved shooting with that camera, especially with adapted vintage lenses to really help give me that film-like shooting experience and final results. So I've kind of been chasing that experience since then. I've also been shooting a lot more 35mm film lately, so I had the amazing idea of picking up a medium format film camera, combining my love for film photography and my desire for that medium format look without having to spend a lot of money on a Fujifilm GFX. So those roads converged into what this video is about, the Mamiya 645. The Mamiya 645 is a medium format film camera, meaning that it shoots 120mm film instead of the smaller 35mm that is much more common among film shooters. And I'm not going to get into all the technical specs of the Mamiya here, but there are a few first impressions that I had with the camera when I first got it, and I want to share those here. Right off the bat, this is quite a large and heavy camera. It also has quite an interesting shape, not sticking to any of the norms of your typical camera. That means that you have to hold it and operate it quite differently than you would with a 35mm camera or any digital camera. You've got a couple of dials on the sides here to set your shutter speed and to rate your film speed. And mine also came with one of the kit lenses, the 80mm 2.8. More on that later. There are a couple of different viewfinder options for this camera that you can actually swap out if you own multiple of them, but this particular model I ordered from eBay came with the Prism viewfinder with a built-in light meter. However, the light meter in this particular camera has never worked for me, even with fresh batteries, so I'll just chalk that part up as a loss. That's fine with me. The Prism viewfinder uses a split image focusing system, which means that there's a little diagonal line in the middle of the viewfinder, and then you turn the focusing ring on the lens until the image is lined up and in focus. And I wish I had a way of filming the inside of the viewfinder so you can see what the viewing experience is like, but I don't have a macro lens or anything, so you'll have to take my word for it that it is very accurate and usable for me, although that does not mean that I'm incredibly good at it yet. It can still be difficult to focus my shot accurately, especially for like a moving target, but more on that later. There's also the big wind-up lever on the side to advance your film while you're shooting, which is one of my personal favorite aspects of the camera. If it wasn't clear already by the design of the camera and how it's operated, the whole experience with the Mamiya 645 is incredibly slow. And I'm not presenting this as an inherently negative aspect of the camera, as there are a lot of good reasons to use a camera with the intention of slowing down. You know, I talk a lot on this channel about intentionality with your photography, and slowing down while you're shooting is an easy way to achieve that intentionality. And I can tell you right now that it's going to be very easy to slow down with the Mamiya 645 because there's just no other way to shoot with it. Even loading and unloading your film in the back of the camera is kind of an arduous process. You know, with a 35mm camera, it's pretty quick and easy to, slot the roll in, pull the film leader out, close it up, and start shooting. But on the Mamiya here, you've got a whole cassette in the back that you have to pull out, put the roll on, pull it up and around in a very specific way, slot it into the thing, and then line it up perfectly before you can put it back in the camera and start shooting. And then you have to wind the lever between every single shot and then focus your lens very carefully, because with medium format, you're probably going to have a very thin depth of field. So even slightly missing focus could be very apparent in your final image. And not to mention that since my built-in light meter in this Prism viewfinder doesn't work, I have to use a light meter on my app every time I'm shooting in a new lighting scenario. And as a side note, the app that I'm using is simply called Light Meter, and it works very well, so I can recommend it, that one. Now, I hope you didn't hear all of that and think that I'm just presenting all of these points as negatives, as again, I think slowing down for certain types of photography can be a very valuable practice. Whenever I take a portrait or landscape with this camera, my shooting style and approach is far more intentional than when I shoot with any digital camera, even more intentional than when I shoot with a 35mm camera. Because on 120mm film, you're only getting 15 shots as opposed to the 24 or 36 that you normally get on 35mm film. So you get half the number of shots than you normally do with 35 film. So each photo you take on the Mamiya has to be incredibly intentional and thought out, because every time you wind this bad boy up and hit that shutter button, you burn 1 out of 15 possible shots before you have to take the cassette out and spend the time to put a new roll in. You can also miss focus very easily with this camera if you don't take your time with each shot. And again, you only get 15 shots with each roll, so you can't really afford to mess around with random photos, or maybe you do. Maybe you're crazy rich and have a massive film budget. I don't know you. That's you, good for you. That's not me though. So at this point, you might be wondering why in the hell anyone would choose to shoot with such a camera these days. Why would you possibly want to make your job as a photographer so much slower and more difficult? And for me, the answer is quite simple. The results are incredible. I was admittedly skeptical about the whole medium format look that people talk about, but after shooting the GFX 50S2 a couple of months ago, I started to see what people were talking about. And now, after shooting a more true medium format with 120mm film, it has never been more apparent that medium format is just in its own league. With medium format, there's this richness in the colors, a greater depth in the detail and clarity in the image, and a sort of subject separation that just can't be fully replicated outside of medium format, no matter how shallow your depth of field can get on a full frame camera. I took my Mamiya 645 on a trip to Colorado a couple of weeks ago, and once I got the scans back, I was pretty jazzed about how they came out, especially because I knew I was still learning the camera and I didn't know if I had made any huge mistakes with it while shooting. It's my first time metering light, especially outside of a camera. I was kind of nervous about that. And I hope these results speak for themselves, and I'm not trying to brag on my skills as a photographer necessarily here, although I do think I did a pretty good job shooting here in Colorado, but more just trying to highlight how capable this camera is in rendering details, colors, and subject separation. And I don't want to neglect some of the heavy lifting that this lens was doing as well. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, my Mamiya 645 came with the 80mm 2.8. It's one of the kit lenses, and in full frame terms, that's about a 50mm field of view. I was really impressed with how sharp and detailed this lens is. I own several vintage lenses now, and they're all good for their different applications, but this is definitely the sharpest vintage lens that I now own, because even wide open at 2.8, the detail that it's able to capture is quite noticeable to me compared to those other lenses. The only thing that I would change about the lens, if it was up to me, would be to loosen the focus ring just a little bit. It can be quite stiff, at least compared to my other manual focus lenses, so it takes me just a little bit longer to get my focus to where I need it to be. And that, sometimes that actually kind of helps out when I'm really needing to take my time with like a portrait or something at 2.8, as again, that depth of field, even at 2.8, can be razor thin. But I do feel like sometimes it slows me down just a little bit too much. It's not a huge deal though, and it's definitely worth getting used to so that you can experience all the good that it has to offer on this camera. So I've said a lot of good things about this camera so far in this video, and so at this point you might be wondering when I'm going to talk about the big problem I have with it. Well, here we go. I'm about to get into it. So I shot 6 rolls of film while we were in Colorado. That's 3 rolls of 35mm on my Nikon N75, and then 3 rolls of 120 on the Mamiya 645. And I loved all the results from the scans, including the ones from a very expired roll of Kodak Gold from the 1970s that I found laying around. It's a very interesting look here for sure. So when I got all these scans back, I was just showing them to my wife and getting really excited with how well most of them turned out, and she was loving the results too. But at one point, she did look at me and go, "So how much did it cost to get all these developed?" And for some reason, it wasn't until my loving and beautiful, smart, very wise wife asked that simple question when it hit me. I had just spent over $130 just on the developing and scanning alone for this film. It kind of brought me back down to earth for a minute, and I was like, oh, that's not cheap. That cost doesn't even include the purchasing of the actual film to begin with, so I did some math. Including the developing and scanning cost and the cost of actually buying the roll of film to begin with, I'm paying approximately too much per photo I take on the Mamiya 645 and for film in general. That's $130 that I could have spent on some kind of continued education for me and my business, running ads for my wedding photography, or even like groceries for my family. And my wife wasn't trying to shame me or stop me from shooting film. She really wasn't. She loves that I do this. But I came to the realization myself very quickly that this might not be the best thing to spend a lot of money on right now. And that right there is my biggest problem with the Mamiya 645. Film is just very expensive to shoot now. And that really sucks because I absolutely love shooting film. And there's so many shoots that I've done lately where I shoot both digital and film, and I find myself always preferring the film shots that I got. But I had to be realistic with myself and with our finances. Now, of course, my business finances are separate from our personal, but every time I spend money from my business towards things like gear or developing film, that's money that could have been put in our personal savings for a rainy day. And this is just one of those things that I had to be honest with myself and take the emotion out of it, because I do have quite an emotional attachment to shooting film. Now, there's nothing wrong with being emotional about your work. We're photographers, we're artists, like there is emotion with it. But if you want to run a successful business, you can't just be the artsy photographer who only cares about how your photography makes you feel. You have to pay attention to the business side of things as well. And so for me and my family right now, shooting too much film is starting to pose a problem for me. And lastly, on this note, please don't try to convince me to develop and scan my own film at home. I get a lot of comments about this every time I talk about film. Why don't you just, develop and scan yourself? And I know a lot of people do that to save on cost and because they just like the process, but I'm just simply not at a point in my life where I can do that. I'm a working dad with a family, full-time job, freelance work, this YouTube channel, a mortgage to pay, all of that stuff. And I absolutely just do not have the time or space to dedicate to developing and scanning film right now. Maybe several years from now, I can give that a shot, but it's just not on the cards for me at this time. Okay, so what's my solution to all this? Easy. I bought another camera. Okay, all right. Let me clarify. I loved the images from the Mamiya so much that I really wanted to start trying to make it a regular part of my style, kind of that medium format part of my style, and eventually, making that into my portfolio. But like I just talked about, I can't justify the cost of shooting film all the time. I realized that a lot of the look that I loved from these photos was coming from the 80mm 2.8 on the Mamiya. So I started looking for ways to shoot this lens on digital. And of course, the most clear solution was, you guessed it, to finally just invest into a Fujifilm GFX camera. This is now my personal GFX 50S2 that I own. I had such a great experience with it for that wedding back in May that I made a video about, and I knew it was the one that I was eventually going to get when the time was right. And of course, I'm going to make a dedicated video or two about this camera in the near future, but I've only had it for about a week now, so I'm going to keep it short here for now. I've got the Kipon, I pronounce that, adapter to use the Mamiya 80mm 2.8 on the GFX, and in my very short time testing it so far, I can tell you that it is absolutely sublime. I try not to let myself slip into the honeymoon phase with gear now. I can be bad about that, but this setup is making it extremely hard for me to avoid that. I've also been using my Voigtlander 40mm 1.2 adapted to the GFX, another combo that is just nuts. So I've definitely got some more testing here to do with it, and I encourage you to subscribe so you can keep up with my journey there, and if you're curious about my results with this setup. And now, you might still be yelling at me about spending more money after I just talked about how expensive it is to develop film. So how did I justify all of this in my brain? I had to come to the very difficult decision to sell off all of my Fujifilm X-mount gear, which includes my beloved XT5 and the amazing prime lenses that I have with it. I'm telling you, I really had to remove as much emotion as I could from this decision, as I became very attached to my XT5. But it served me very well for the past couple of years, and it's time to move on to the next phase of my journey with Fujifilm, and I'm confident that this is the right move for me now. So now my current digital camera kit is the GFX 50S2, the Nikon ZF, the Sony A7 IV, and the Sony A7 III. And for people new to my channel, I use the Sony kit for all of my video work, and I occasionally break out the A7 IV for some photo stuff, if any of that makes sense. So what do you think about all of this? Do you also shoot film? Maybe you already have the Mamiya 645, or you're thinking about getting one to expand into medium format photography. I would love to to hear your thoughts in the comments, so please leave those if you have any. And I'll be making more videos throughout the coming weeks about the GFX, like I mentioned earlier, maybe how it pairs with the Nikon ZF, what I'll be shooting weddings with, what I'm using to shoot personal photos, all of that kind of stuff. So really, you should definitely subscribe if you want to keep up with my journey here, and of course see all the photos that I will be taking. And I also plan on doing more videos about non-gear related topics, you know, like maybe stuff about more composition. I did a composition video last week, and I'm proud of that. It did well. I appreciate the feedback on that. I want to talk about color. I want to talk about lighting, maybe some photography business topics, stuff like that. You can support me for $0 by simply liking this video and commenting to keep the conversation going, as I do my best to respond to every comment. And all of that activity tells the algorithm that this is a video that more people should watch. You can also follow me on Instagram, keep up with me there. You can DM me on Instagram with questions. A lot of people have been doing that lately, and I'm happy to give my thoughts or advice on different things there. So please follow me on Instagram. That link is in the description. You can support me even further by picking up my Fujifilm preset pack, or even just the free Chrome preset, as those free downloads tells me that I'm doing at least something right. I didn't push those presets earlier in the video because this is a video mainly about film, but if you are shooting digital and like the way that my digital photos look, you can pick up my preset pack to kind of get yourself started there. And if you don't want to do any of that, that's totally fine, because I will see you in the algorithm in 6 months.